Welcome to Part 3. The short-term organic carbon cycle involves processes ranging from those we can observe and appreciate on a daily to seasonal timescale, such as the processes of photosynthesis and respiration, to processes of decomposition that are somewhat slower. The key step in this cycle is the conversion of inorganic carbon, that is atmospheric carbon dioxide, to organic carbon by the process of photosynthesis. We are not so much interested in the process itself, but rather in its impact on the global cycle, which is generally expressed as primary productivity. Primary productivity is the amount of organic matter produced by photosynthesis in a unit time over a unit area of the Earth's surface. That amount depends on the population size of primary producers, that is, plants or other types of photosynthesizers, or even chemosynthesizers that provide energy other organisms can use. The relationship is not simple, however, because some primary producer species are much more productive than others. In its simplest representation, primary production involves a chemical reaction between carbon dioxide and water to form organic matter and oxygen. Here, the organic matter is represented by CH2O, or formaldehyde. This is the simplest carbohydrate. In reality, of course, the molecules making up organic matter are much larger than this simple carbohydrate, and they contain small amounts of many other elements, including nitrogen and phosphorus. But for our purposes, this simpler representation suffices. Photosynthesis does not occur spontaneously at the Earth's surface, but instead requires an input of energy from the sun. Plants, algae, and bacteria have evolved pigments that are able to capture the energy of sunlight and convert it to chemical energy, part of which is stored in living tissues. This chemical energy is then utilized by other organisms that cannot utilize solar energy directly. Such organisms, including animals, are called consumers. Most of the photosynthesis that occurs each year leads to the formation of tissue that is rapidly recycled, including the leaves of trees. This recycling is the cause of the seasonal variations observed in the carbon dioxide record of the animation I showed earlier. However, most of the organic carbon that makes up plant tissues has a residence time of many decades. That is because the bulk of the organic carbon in terrestrial plants is contained not in the leaves but in the roots and trunks of slow-growing trees. In other words, most of the biomass of primary producers on Earth is contained in tree roots and trunks. Biomass is the total mass of organic matter in living organisms in a particular reservoir. In terms of carbon, the total living biomass, the combined biomasses of all primary producers and consumers, is about equal to the atmospheric carbon reservoir. Consumer biomass is a small percentage, only about 1% of the biomass of that of the producers. Consumers derive their metabolic energy from the chemical energy stored in plant tissues by ingesting the tissues and respiring. Respiration is the reverse of photosynthesis. It is the chemical reaction between oxygen and carbohydrate to form carbon dioxide and water. Note that respiration is the reverse of photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, plants use solar energy to create tissue. But like animals, plants produce their metabolic energy through respiration. Hence, respiration is more than just the breathing performed by animals. Unlike photosynthesis, respiration would proceed abiotically because it releases rather than requires energy. However, it would do so very slowly. Organisms are able to accelerate this chemical reaction by the use of enzymes, chemical compounds, specifically proteins, that they synthesize for this particular purpose. On land, about half the organic matter produced by photosynthesis is respired by animals and by plants themselves. The remaining material is added to the organic rich upper layers of soil. A host of microscopic bacteria and fungi live in the soil. Their metabolic requirements are satisfied through the decomposition of the large store of organic matter that is buried there, fueled by the supply of oxygen from the overlying layers. A biological process that uses oxygen is said to be aerobic, and an organism that carries out aerobic metabolism is an aerobe. The chemical reaction for this aerobic decomposition is identical to that for respiration. Because the only source of oxygen is the air, the microorganisms that live well below the surface must be adapted to environments that are devoid of oxygen. A biological process that occurs in the absence of oxygen is said to be anaerobic, and an organism that carries out anaerobic metabolism is an anaerobe. In the oxygen-free environment of deep soil live anaerobic bacteria that decompose organic matter by an overall process known as methanogenesis. Methanogenesis is an anaerobic form of metabolism that involves multiple steps carried out by different bacteria. The gases carbon dioxide and methane can escape to the atmosphere. Once there, the carbon dioxide continues the short-term cycling path described earlier. Methane, however, is chemically unstable in our oxygen-rich atmosphere and is destroyed by a series of oxidation reactions. The carbon contained in methane combines with oxygen to form carbon dioxide. With an atmospheric reservoir size of 5 gigatons of carbon and a supply rate from fermentation of 0.5 gigatons of carbon per year, the residence time of methane in the atmosphere is approximately 10 years. The land surface is continually stripped of its soil cover by the action of winds and water. On average, about 5 centimeters of soil is eroded from the land surface every 1,000 years and transported by rivers to the oceans. Although river systems have a substantial capacity for storing sediment in floodplains and deltas, eventually most of the sediment makes its way to the oceans and is deposited on the sea floor. These sediments contain whatever organic matter has survived the trip from land to sea. Thus there is a transfer of organic carbon from the terrestrial to the marine realm, one that amounts to about 0.1 gigatons of carbon per year. However, this transfer is small compared with the flux through the oceanic water column of organic matter produced in the ocean. This is the end of part 3.